The Unpaid Ledger, Season 2, Episode 6, The Other End. Chapter 1. At 10:15 on a Thursday morning, April put a call through I hadn't expected. Nothing rang at the office before noon unless April had already screened it. So when the desk phone made its tired electronic sound, I knew it was something else before I picked up. Eddie was in the corner chair, pretending to read something. He hadn't turned a page in 12 minutes and hadn't commented on the rain, which had been on and off since dawn. For 2 days he'd been watching me without saying what he was watching for. "Vance," I said into the phone. The voice was a woman, mid-40s, clipped and used to being answered. She introduced herself as Nina Park, a labor attorney working out of the South Side, and said Marcus Bell's brother-in-law's wife had given her my name. I told her I knew who Marcus's brother-in-law's wife was, which was a polite lie. She said she had a client whose situation was unusual in a way that wasn't covered by employment law. "Tell me the shape of it," I said. Her client was a warehouse shift supervisor named Roxanne Mendez, suspended pending investigation after 3 months of what the company was calling pattern of disturbance localized to your shift. Inventory miscounts, equipment that wouldn't start for her but started for the next operator. A near miss on the loading dock. The phrasing in the suspension notice had caught Nina's eye because she'd seen it twice before in the past 2 years, and both prior cases had ended with the worker out of a job and the company never fully explaining what they meant by the word disturbance. She'd asked Marcus's people whether they knew anyone who handled the unusual end of things. They'd given her my name. Nina said she could have Roxy at the office in an hour. I told her to make it an hour and a half. I needed to clear my morning. "Done," she said. I set the phone down. Eddie had turned a page, but he hadn't been reading it. The call had come off the queue, which meant April hadn't been the one to screen it. She'd be glad of the work. The queue had been thin lately. Eddie didn't look glad. Roxanne Mendez came in at 11:45 with Nina Park beside her and a thermos of coffee in her hand that she did not offer. She was in her mid-40s, built for floor work. She sat down without taking her coat off, with her hands still on the thermos. She was here for Nina, not for me. I let her tell the story, and she told it plain. The temp injury report 3 months ago, a kid named Marco, 21, dropped a pallet jack on his foot, and the company had wanted him to sign off on a workers' comp release for a bandage and a Tylenol. Roxy had filed an injury report on his behalf instead. 2 weeks later, things on her shift started going wrong. Inventory short by 2 pallets. A forklift she'd checked out of the cage that wouldn't turn over for 10 minutes, and then started fine for the day operator. A near miss with a load that came down the dock ramp at the wrong angle. Last week, HR had handed her a suspension letter with the word disturbance in it 3 times. She stopped there, took a drink from the thermos she'd brought, and screwed the cap back on with both hands, slow and deliberate. Nina started to add something, and Roxy cut her off. "I've been running that shift for 11 years. 32 people clock in under me. I know where every pallet goes, and I know who put it there. Whatever is happening on my floor, it isn't coming from my floor." She told me she didn't believe in whatever it was I did, and that she was here because Nina had told her to be. Nina had said I was practical, which was what she'd come to test. She gave me an all right that wasn't quite agreement. She'd put her work badge on the corner of the desk when she sat down. When I asked if I could pick it up, she told me it was a piece of plastic and I could do what I wanted. I picked it up. The wrongness was immediate, not the diffuse low weight of cost contamination. Not like Donna Parrish's house 6 weeks ago, and not residue. The badge had been touched by a practitioner who had laid signatures across it like a printer laying type, uniform depth, even spacing. The marks all sat at the same age. I set the badge back down where she had put it. The bracelet on my right wrist had warmed during the moment I held the badge. Not hotter, exactly, but heavier. The same heaviness I'd felt in a parking lot 4 months ago. Eddie in the corner chair had not moved his eyes off it. I'd like to come down to the yard tomorrow morning before your shift starts, I said. 6 a.m., if Nina can arrange access. I want to walk the spaces you work in. Roxy said her shift started at 6, and they didn't let her on the property right now. Nina said she was working on a sympathetic dispatcher. Roxy said he was a friend of her cousin's, and he'd be there. Then I'll be there. She studied me for a long moment. She had come in expecting a charlatan and was now revising. Whatever you're going to do, she said, don't do it on company time. I want my job back the regular way. I don't want to look any crazier than I already do. I told her I understood, and they left. I stood in the office a minute longer, looking at the spot on the desk where the badge had been. Eddie had come over to the desk without my noticing. He didn't have to tell me the work had been signed to be found or ask about the bracelet. I picked up my keys and went down to the Taurus, and Eddie came with me out of the office because that was the only direction he ever went. Chapter 2. The yard at 6 in the morning looked like a yard at 6 in the morning. Sodium lights still on. Frost on the chain link. Diesel cold rolling off the loading dock, the same as every warehouse at this hour. Roxy's cousin's friend was a wide-shouldered man named Valdez in a neon vest, and he met me at the security gate with a paper cup of coffee and didn't ask any questions. 40 minutes, he said. Day shift starts coming in at 6:50. After that, you're on your own. I told him that was enough. When he asked where I needed to go, I gave him the list. Supervisor's office. Locker room. The dispatch window. He nodded once and unlocked a side door. I'll be in the booth. Lights stay on the way they are. I went in. Eddie came with me through the door without using it. The supervisor's office was a glass-walled box at the end of the dispatch corridor. Big enough for a desk, a filing cabinet, 2 folding chairs, and a corkboard with shift schedules pinned at angles that had been corrected by hand. The desk was clean. The clipboard at the dispatch window was the deepest concentration in the room. I could feel it from across the floor. I started with the locker. The locker room was down a hallway smelling of WD-40 and old paper. Roxy's locker was in the second row, third from the end. The padlock had a key taped to the back of it, which Valdez had warned me about. Inside was a fleece jacket, a clipboard of her own, a thermos lid, and a Polaroid of a dog scotch-taped to the inside of the door. The locker handle held a signature stamp at the surface, clean and patterned, laid in one sitting. I set my hand on it, opened the red all the way, and watched the bracelet. It stayed quiet, cool, ordinary metal against my pulse. I pulled the mark off the handle. Standard conduit, low cost, nothing complicated. The gray space at the edge of my awareness sat steady, not engaging. The mark passed through me and dispersed into the building's general weight. The badge was on the desk in the supervisor's office, clipped to a lanyard that Roxy had left coiled on the corner the day they suspended her. I picked the lanyard up and read the badge a second time, slower this time, and found everything I'd found yesterday plus the depth I hadn't been close enough to see in the office. The signature didn't just sit on the surface. It had been laid in 3 layers, each calibrated to a different red distance, the top layer for any practitioner who walked past Roxy at 30 feet. The middle layer for any red inside a meeting room, the bottom layer for the close work that a serious practitioner does with hands. It was a complete address, reachable from anywhere, which wasn't framing. I set the badge down and stood in the supervisor's office a moment longer. Eddie was at my shoulder. What he saw was what I saw, a phone number. The clipboard was the last and the deepest. It hung on a nail by the dispatch window. The sheet on it covered in dock assignments from before Roxy was suspended. The signature on it had 3 layers like the badge, plus a 4th I hadn't expected, a calibration mark. The kind a practitioner lays when they want to be sure their work will hold a specific frequency over time. The mark was small and centered, patient work. I took the clipboard down off the nail. The bracelet warmed before I started the pull, already warm by the time I noticed. I started the pull. The first 3 layers came up clean. Surface, meeting room, close work, the lock unwound under standard conduit at low cost, and the gray space stayed at the edge. Then the calibration mark. I went down for it, and the bracelet rang. Not a sound, a change of state. The metal at my wrist went hot, not from my skin, from somewhere else, passing through like current through a wire. My right arm went numb to the elbow for half a second. Then something on the other end answered. Not a presence, a pressure. The calibration mark woke under my hands and started doing what it had been built to do, opening a channel to send a cost down onto Roxy. I felt the cost beginning to take shape, small, heart-shaped, patient. Something that would have looked, on autopsy, like nothing at all. My fingers locked on the clipboard. The muscles in my forearm were not listening to me. The bracelet was doing something between my skin and the cost. I could feel both of them. The forming shape and the metal pressed against each other with my wrist in between. The cost pushed, but the bracelet held. My vision went narrow for a second, the dispatch window shrinking to a bright slot, and then the bracelet absorbed the cost before it could finish forming. The line went dead. My hands opened, and the clipboard was still in them. I leaned my forearm against the dispatch window and held the read open and finished the pull. The calibration mark came up, passed through me, dispersed. The clipboard was clean. I stayed against the window for a count of 10, then 12, then 14, then 16. The bracelet cooled, and I straightened up. My right hand was slow at the small things, and when I tried to put the clipboard back on its nail, it took me 3 approaches to land it square. I moved it the rest of the way with my left. Eddie said my name from just behind my left shoulder, quiet. I let him know I was still here. He'd seen 2 things. They'd keep until we were in the car. I walked out of the office past Valdez at the booth. He looked up, and I told him we were done. He said he'd lock up. The Taurus's heater took a minute to come on. I sat in the driver's seat and waited for it, because the alternative was driving with cold hands. Eddie was in the passenger seat and he waited too. I pulled out of the lot and turned toward the loop. "Talk to me," I said. "2 things," Eddie said. One was in the work. He told me about the second fingerprint, deeper and older than the surface work, with its own rhythm and calibration, the mark of someone who'd learned the technique somewhere else entirely. It had been baked into Vince's work. Whoever taught him had built it into the technique itself, and Vince had been laying it every time without knowing. "Vince doesn't know it's there," I said, and Eddie didn't say otherwise. I asked him about the second thing. He was quiet for a stretch before he answered. "The bracelet," he said. "When it went hot, it drew a line. Not at anything in the room. Out. Past the building, past the city, and I couldn't see where it ended." I asked if it was like a beam. "More like a phone line," he said. I took the next exit. I knew what I was doing 2 seconds after I'd done it. The Garfield Industrial exit. Derek's old warehouse, not the diner. Wrong exit on a road I knew by reflex. Eddie waited until I'd reached the bottom of the ramp to tell me evenly that I'd missed the loop. I told him I saw that and I kept driving anyway. The warehouse was on the right at the second light. The gate had been closed for a while and the yard inside was empty. I drove past without slowing down because slowing down would have made it harder. And Eddie didn't say anything about it. I rerouted at the next intersection, costing me time I didn't want to think about. We rode in silence for a while. "On the phone?" I said finally. You said the bracelet drew a line like a phone line. Was someone on the other end? Eddie didn't answer right away. Someone picked up, he said. Chapter 3. The diner on Whittier opened at 5:30 for the people who started work at 6 and stayed open until 2 for the people who finished work at midnight. Vinyl booths, a coffee pot that had been on a burner since dawn, a television above the register tuned to a morning show that nobody was watching. Derek's truck was in the lot. He had taken the booth in the back corner against the window. I slid in across from him, and he looked the same. Same shoulders, same way of folding his hands around a coffee mug. Same stillness he'd been carrying since before I'd known him. The diner light was flat on his face. The weight he had carried for 8 years was gone. What had replaced it was not lighter, just empty. His boots had road dust on them when he shifted his foot under the table, fine and pale. Not the color of any road in Ashford. Derek waved the waitress over without looking when I told him I wanted coffee. She came by and poured. He did not say anything else until she left, then nodded at me. I took out the notebook and walked him through the morning, the surface signature on Roxy's badge and clipboard. The depth of the calibration, the rhythm and spacing, the underneath fingerprint Eddie had seen. Derek didn't ask how I had the description. He took it in and wrote 2 things in his own notebook. Surface guy first, he said. Rhythm and spacing put him in the regional set, 18 months out of standing. Vince Ramos, lives on Calder Street in North Ashford. Takes work that doesn't ask him questions. I'll text you the number. I noted the address. And the underneath? I said. He turned a page in his notebook and sat with it for a count of 3. The pattern you're describing, he said. The technique laid into another placer's work without the placer knowing. That maps to something the Bureau classified obsolete in 1953. They called it overlay placement. The records I saw during my time stopped that year. Why was it obsolete? The reason given in the file was that the originating practitioners were no longer practicing. Derek took a careful sip of coffee. The file did not say what no longer practicing meant. The records ended at the date and didn't pick up again. Obsolete usually means dead, I said. He said it usually did, though the file didn't say that either. I sat with that. That puts it more than 70 years dark, I said. In Bureau records, anyway. I'd want to read whatever else has surfaced before I put a stronger word on it. I waited. He turned another page and looked at me across the table without writing anything. What aren't you telling me? He said. There were several things I was not telling him, and the bracelet was the one that mattered. Marcus needed to hear it first. I'll know more after I see Vince, I said. I'll call you tonight. He looked at me a moment longer, took it, did not push. He had not pushed at anything for 8 years, and whatever else had changed about him this morning, that hadn't. All right, he said. When I asked how he was doing, he told me he was fine and called me Sam. His tone was even, the same as everything else he said. I didn't push, drank the rest of my coffee, and paid for both, and he let me. He stood when I stood, put on his jacket, walked out beside me into the parking lot. The sun was up by now, low, February pale. His truck was in the next row. He did not turn to me as we crossed. The truck bed had a canvas duffel in it I hadn't seen before. The duffel was road dirty and full. Next to it sat a folded map, paper. Not a phone, with creases that had been opened and refolded enough times to wear white lines into the ink. Long drive, I said. He looked at the duffel. I'll be at home tonight when you call. He hadn't answered my question. I watched him get in the truck and pull out. The road dust on his boots had been pale and fine. County roads west of Ashford were dark soil. The ones north were sandy. The pale color belonged to something further out than that. I called Marcus from the lot before I started the Taurus. He picked up on the second ring and called me young man. I told him I'd come by this afternoon after I saw somebody else. He told me to bring the warm thing on my wrist. He hadn't asked what was wrong with it. He hadn't had to come around 4, he said. I told him I would, and hung up, and got in the Taurus. Eddie was in the passenger seat. He had been in the diner with us, but he had not said anything inside, and he did not say anything for the first quarter mile out of the lot. Then he said, evenly, that he wasn't going to ask. He had seen the duffel too. I thanked him, and he didn't say you're welcome as we drove toward Calder Street. Chapter 4. Calder Street was a stretch of North Ashford where the houses had been cut into apartments in 1978 and never put back together. Vince Ramos lived on the second floor of a duplex with vinyl siding and a porch that had settled half an inch off square. The front door was wedged open with a brick. I went up the stairs. He answered the inside door in a Carhartt sweatshirt and house slippers, going thin on top, mid-30s. He had been expecting a knock at this door for a while. He had not been expecting it to be me. He said my name carefully. He had been thinking about it. I said his, and he stepped aside. The apartment was clean and mostly empty. There was a kitchen table with 2 chairs. He sat in one, and I sat in the other. And he let out a breath he had been holding since he opened the door. I told him why I was there, the work at the South Industrial Yard. When I said Roxanne Mendez's name, he didn't bother pretending. He'd done some work at the yard, he said. I asked who'd paid him. He said it had been a routine job. A name he didn't remember. A guy who paid in cash and didn't come back. He'd done a lot of those over the years. There was nothing in particular about this one. The lie sat between us, and he heard it too. His left hand had moved from the table to his lap before he finished talking, and was still there. The breath he'd let out when he sat down had not come back yet. Try again, I said. He tried again. Hollings had paid a guy who'd paid a guy who'd told him to do it. He had never met Hollings. He had known somebody wanted Roxy to look like the source of imbalance on a practitioner sweep, and he had not asked why. I should have asked why, he said. I didn't say anything. He wasn't denying it, and he wasn't pretending it was okay. I described his fingerprint back to him, the rhythm and the spacing, the depth of the layers, the calibration mark on the clipboard. All right, he said. I asked him for a written statement, names, dates, the work as he understood it, bureaucratic terms only. Nothing that would make a labor lawyer's day harder. Describe it as private investigative work that was used to construct a misleading pattern. He said that was what it was, and got up, and took a notepad off the kitchen counter, and started writing. He wrote for 10 minutes without asking what to put in. When he was done, he handed it across the table. It was neat and adequate, something a labor lawyer could work with. I folded it. One more thing, I said. Who taught you the work? Hewitt, out of Erie, he said. Died of cirrhosis in 2022. I asked if anyone since Hewitt had shown him anything new. He thought about it. A couple of one-time consults, he said. Nothing recent. Nobody who'd come back twice. I read him through the answer. He was telling me the truth as he understood it. I put the statement in my coat pocket and stood. He stood with me. I told him to stop taking work when he couldn't see who was paying. He'd already figured that one out, he said. The news that Roxy was getting her job back he took with a single nod. We did not shake hands. I went down the stairs and out past the brick. I called Nina from the parked Taurus and drove to the office. April was at her desk and Nina was in the client chair. Roxy had taken the second client chair. In the same coat she'd been in that morning, hands still on the same thermos. I put Vince's statement on the desk between them. Nina read it through once and then again, slower. When she looked up, she nodded once at me and once at Roxy. Roxy didn't say anything for a stretch. Then she said, "When?" 3 days, with this in front of HR, Nina said. 2, if their counsel doesn't try to argue. They won't. Roxy set the thermos down for the first time since she'd walked in that morning. "All right," she said. She didn't say it to me. She stood. Nina stood with her, and they left. I stayed in the office. There was an envelope under the door, white cardstock, no return like the others. A name, a date, a placement that had finished poorly years ago, work I could clear in a couple of visits. I put it in my coat pocket on top of where Vince's statement had been. I'd been doing that for a while now, and it had already become routine. I locked up and went to Marcus's. Marcus's shop was a 40-minute drive across town, and the afternoon had gotten long by the time I parked behind it. He had the back door open already and the kettle on. The teapot on the counter was the chipped one, which meant he had decided in advance that this was a working conversation and not a social one. I sat at the small table in the back. He poured, and I didn't pick up the cup. Eddie stood at the bookshelf where he always stood when we were here. Marcus had set a third cup on the table without asking. Just hot water, no tea, but the cup was there. I walked him through the morning. Roxy's badge, the yard, the clipboard. The bracelet going hot during the calibration pull, Eddie's report on the second fingerprint and the line. I told him about Derek and what I'd learned about overlay placement in 1953 and about Vince. I held my right arm out across the table so he could see the bracelet. He did not touch the bracelet, although my arm was right there in front of him. When I was done, he was quiet for a long stretch. "This isn't a collector, young man." He folded his hands on the table. "Same family, different branch. Collectors have appetites, and the appetites have ends. The man who first told me about it called it a frequency eater. That was not its real name. He said the closest word for the real name was older than English, and he wouldn't say it out loud. He said the practitioners who knew that word are all dead. Whether he was being literal or showing off, I never could tell." Marcus went on. "He was a man who could have meant either. He's been dead since the 80s. It hunts vessels, things that hold cost over time without breaking down." He looked at the bracelet. "That bracelet has been quietly absorbing small dissipations since the day it attached to you. Your wrist has been holding it steady since then. To something that hunts vessels, the two of you together have been sending up a signal for 4 months. And the pull this morning," I said. He didn't break eye contact. That was the first time the signal got loud. I sat with it. "Can it be settled?" The collector wanted 12 deaths paid. "This isn't owed anything, and it isn't hungry for a debt. It's hungry for the vessel." He met my eyes. "There's nothing to pay it with except you." I was on my feet before I'd thought about it. The chair behind me caught against the wall. Marcus hadn't moved. I started to say his name and stopped. He answered anyway. "I know what I'm telling you, young man." My right hand had moved to the bracelet, fingers under the metal, trying to lift it past my wrist bone. Nothing moved, not the metal, not the skin around it. The bracelet pulsed once under my fingers, short and specific. I sat back down because there was nowhere else to go. He was quiet for a long time after that. "Take the bracelet off." "I just tried," I said. It didn't move. He'd had to ask anyway, he said. I had a question of my own. "How long do I have?" He didn't answer right away. He hadn't been holding his cup, and he didn't pick it up now. "I don't know, young man. I don't think anyone who knew the answer is still around to ask." Marcus had not reached for the bracelet the entire time it was in front of him. "I'll reach out to Clara," he said. "And the man I know in Lancaster, if he's still answering his phone. I don't promise anything. The people who would have known about this directly are mostly dead. I told him I understood. Come back tomorrow, he said. I'll have made the calls. I sat back, and the metal at my pulse was ordinary again. I drove home through the thin February light. The apartment was the apartment. I turned the lamp on by the door, put water on, and sat at the table. Eddie went to the chair across the room and sat. I got back up from my coat to put the Leland envelope on the desk for tomorrow. The pocket was empty, and so was the other one. The bag I'd been carrying since the office didn't have it either. I tried to remember the last time I'd touched the envelope and couldn't. The faucet in the kitchen had a drip that came every 4 seconds. I'd been meaning to fix it for a month. Eddie was watching the window. There was nothing outside it except the building across the street and the fire escape. But he watched it anyway. The drip hit the basin and hit it again. What are you watching for? He didn't turn from the window. I don't know yet. He'd usually known, even when he wouldn't tell me. The warmth at my right wrist could have meant the bracelet's ordinary work or the new thing it had started this morning. I had no way to tell which. My hands had been flat on the table for a while. When I tried to move them, they were colder than the table. You all right? Eddie said. I watched the faucet drip again before I answered. I'm not sure. The kettle whistled and I didn't get up. Eddie waited until it stopped before he spoke again. That's a different answer. I got up and turned off the burner. I stood at the stove with my back to him. Yeah, I said, and didn't say anything more. I went to bed without checking the bracelet, turning the lamp off on the way. I was almost asleep when the metal at my wrist pulsed once, short, specific, like a phone line where someone on the other end hasn't hung up yet. I sat up. My hand had gone to the bracelet without my asking it to. I waited for the second pulse, but it didn't come.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.